Well, I've actually never been to Birmingham.
You've
So,
never been to Birmingham? Well, that's one of my questions for y'all, because on the wonderful Pansy Division website, there it mentions Alabama once, and I'm like, "I'm not seeing one under the show roster. Is this the first time y'all are coming to Birmingham?"
yeah, it's kind of weird that we never played in Birmingham because we played most places at least once. Um, I, partly where we played was based on where we were hearing from people from and where our booking agents um, knew where to send us. So I remember at one point on one tour, we tried to book at a place called Nick's
The
and
Nick?
at the Nick, um,
Mhm.
but they were booked up. So we were trying to book a southern tour, and they were booked up at the time that we were trying to come through. And and I think after that we started doing shorter tours where we weren't trying to hit everywhere like we were for a few years. And so yeah, we played in Auburn once and in a house, not very glamorous, but we're not about glamour. But that was pretty. We usually don't play house shows. The sound quality is just lousy at those shows. We want people to be able to hear what we're singing. So, but yeah, I mean, also, during we toured so much in the '90s, and since then, it's been a part-time thing or an occasional thing. So we actually haven't been in the South in 20 years. So we're playing Atlanta and New Orleans for the first time in 20 years that same weekend. It was interesting to go back and try to like see where in the South was interested in having us, partly because we don't have as much of a track record there as other places, but also because it had just been so long. But some of the places we've been playing the last couple of years, there has really been an uptick in the number of people seeing us. It's like it seems like there were a whole bunch of people during the pandemic who found out about us, especially younger people who've been showing up at shows, at least the ones that are under 21, which Birmingham is, wonderfully enough. So hopefully that will allow us to have a few more people at the show.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be a great gig. John yeah, I think it's gonna be a really, really great gig. Brian Teasley, who runs the place down here, he plays with Manor Astroman, who I know y'all toured a lot with. So
Yeah,
really excited to have you down here. He says hello. That was
yeah.
actually one of the questions I had for y'all is what was touring with Manor Astroman like back in '97, and do you have any fun memories from that tour?
I do have fun memories. We had met them. We were on the same bill in Burlington, Vermont. And Burlington, Vermont's very small, but it is the only place, I think, in Vermont where you can have a show in a club. And it's on the way to Montreal. So that's how we ended up there on the same bill the same night. And I'd heard them, but I hadn't heard a lot of them. I knew what they were, knew what they sounded like, but I hadn't really listened to them closely. And after playing a show with them, we were both bands are like, wow, we should do more shows together. And I said, well, we haven't, you're a band that's popular in the South, so we should go to the South with you, where we are not as popular as other parts of the country. So we ended up playing shows in the South, none in Alabama though. They were all in Florida and then in New Orleans. But it did get us to a number of places in Florida that we hadn't been before or since.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
Um, what was the Angus experience like? How did that happen? Like with being on the Angus soundtrack?
Um, we were so remember that the Angus movie a was a film that Green Day got us onto the soundtrack for. They had been offered scripts to do various scripts for people who were like wanting, suddenly they got big. Now people wanted their music in their films. So they looked at some scripts and they had a really good one then that they thought, okay, we're going to do a new song for this film and then we're going to get music from bands we like on the soundtrack, and that's how we ended up in that. The thing is, I never read the book that was the source of the film, but there's a gay character in the film who, in the final result, is completely erased. It's one of the kid's parents, but I think the kid's mom was a lesbian trucker. That's what I recall talking to Green Day about it at the time. When the movie came out, there was no reference to that at all. So I had a feeling, as these things happen with movies, they probably showed it to a test group and they didn't like the gay angle, and so they edited the hell out of it. It's an okay film, but it really helped us because we got money from that enabled us to buy a van that we used for the next decade until we drove it into the ground. Um, but it was what we needed money for at the time, so that was where that money got invested, and that kept us going for another 10 years.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So covers are everywhere in Pansy Division's discography. With the cover of Husker Du's "The Biggest Lie" and Beat Happening's "Cry for a Shadow" off the 1993 Nine Inch Nails EP, how were those songs decided? Are you a Husker Du fan in your personal life?
Those are bands I loved, and I was always looking for songs that could be repurposed for Pansy Division. Um, you know, nobody in Husker Du was out in the 80s. They both, Grant and Bob, came out later. But at the time, I had heard things, and I was looking for clues, and I thought that song was a clue, and I thought, well, that's a song we can do. I think that we could. I also want to do a version of a song that is different than the original. And with Husker Du, obviously we are not that hardcore sounding. So I thought, well, we can take this song and make it a more poppy punk song, and still include it in our repertoire. So what we were trying to do was we'd put out these singles, and the A side would be an original, and we put out B sides that were usually covers. So that's what happened with those. The Beat Happening song, though, we just did it because I loved it. We didn't really change it that much at all. But they were a really important band in the formation of Pansy Division because they were so simple. They had, two instruments, three at most on their songs. It's usually guitar and a drum, or maybe two guitars and a drum. And I thought I wanted to do something really minimal. I'd had a band before Pansy Division that was kind of the lineup we have now, two guitars, bass, and drums. But it was in the beginning of Pansy Division, it was just me and a bassist and a drummer, me and Chris, and several drummers before we found Luis, the guy we've had in our band now for 27, 28 years. So we've been around 33. First 5 years went through a lot of drummers. But we had, wanted to do something that wasn't a wall of sound because I really wanted the words to get through. I wanted it to be, jangly and distorted. I wanted it to be, clear enough so that even though we wanted to play loud, I could sing loud, and I wanted the vocals to be received. I thought that was an important part of the sound. So when we were starting the band, I was really thinking of things like Beat Happening and Galaxy 500, who we really don't sound like much at all, but as a template for doing something that is, minimal but really effective. But, over time, we decided that we wanted, it's actually when we got Luis, and we were three-piece with Luis, and he was just so loud that it was really hard to, it seemed like the drums are overpowering everything else. So we thought we need another guitar player, which we wanted anyway, we've been thinking about. So that's how we ended up doing that. But yeah, those covers came out of, for the most part, my personal taste, because I started the band and Chris joined right away, but it was my idea. So for the first couple years, I was kind of, um, 2 or 3 years, it was kind of like, here, I've got the plan, so follow my plan. And then it became more democratic in terms of decision making and songwriting and stuff like that.
Very cool. Thank you so much for that detailed answer. That's answered several of my follow-up questions, which is great.
All right.
Um, what was it like working with Steve Albini for absurd pop song "Romance"? And do you have any favorite Steve Albini records?
um, oh, Steve Albini, favorite Steve Albini records. Well, let's see. I mean, the one the Albini record that I like the best is the Racer X EP. That's the first one I got, and that was the one that turned me on to them. But I've liked different bands, different records of different bands he's had over the years. Apparently, he has a new record coming out. He hasn't done one in a decade with Shellac, so I'll be listening for that. Um, but Albini was great. You know, he has a caustic tongue, and he is not afraid to criticize people. Um, but I think generally he's right. I mean, he's a really smart guy, and you know, working with him was really easy. You know, we knew what we wanted to do. If you go in there and you don't know what to do, he's the wrong guy because he's not going to tell you, well, here's what you need to do. We're going to tell him, we want to do this. How do we achieve that? And then he'll find a way to achieve that. And he had really good ideas when we were working together that that were really good suggestions based on knowing what we were trying to achieve. So he doesn't impose his editorial view on bands. I think that's really important. I think that's rare for somebody of his stature. But we had a great time recording with him. It's our best sounding record. We had gone to a studio the year before in '97 to record a couple of singles because we wanted to see if we could work with him because I'd actually met him once in the '80s, but I didn't really know him. So we thought, well, let's do a single, see how that goes. It went great. So then we went back to do the next album, and it was a pivotal album for us. We thought it might have us take off on our sort of second career because it was a different sound. It was a more varied sound. Didn't really work out that way, but that is the template that we've used ever since. So, you know, we sometimes sound like a punk band, sometimes we don't.
Wow, thank you so much for that. That's amazing. Yeah, Big Black's one of my favorite bands, and just such an influence, especially songs like "Ugly American," "L-Dopa,"
Mhm.
stuff like that, where it's that early drum machine rock vibe, but you just have that piercing high end with lyricism that's just pointing towards everything that's ugly about it. And genuinely, that's something I admire about Pansy Division in the opposite way. Is it's that taking and reframing of things that are going on that are maybe not great, maybe not encouraging, and saying, hey, here's hope, hey, here's good things, here's a narrative you can follow.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I saw Big Black, and I only saw them once, but I did see them, and they were great, and it was pretty brutal, pretty brutal live.
I bet that's awesome. Has the shift in listening formats from like a full physical media to kind of a streaming slash file sharing kind of format changed the way you operate as a musician and the way that Pansy Division operates?
Hmm. I'm not really sure. I think at one point it might have, because in the early days when our first few records came out, we've always recorded inexpensively. And if you record inexpensively and a record sells or starts to sell, you can make money right away. That's what happened with our first three albums. After that, things kind of slowed down. That really was the peak. Like after '96, it didn't really matter how good the records were. There was sort of a downward trend in just the kind of music we were playing. But um, when we when we were so in our early days, we were doing very well and making money from the records. You know, if we were still able to sell that many copies now, I don't know if we'd make money. Um, it's just harder to sell them now. So in some ways, I don't think it's made any difference. If we had had loftier sales figures, then we might have seen an impact. I mean, I think that's the reason why bands like I know in the case of the Pixies, that's one reason they reformed was because suddenly their steady stream of income from the records was drying up and had, gone down quite a bit. So they're like, oh, we need to play some shows. We should get the band back together. So I think that that didn't really affect us. But, I think that one of the things though that happened to us is that we, our old record label Lookout went under and we got all our rights back. So we have everything up on the streaming services going directly to us. We don't make a ton of money, but we make some and we don't have to share it with a label. So it's a few $1,000s every year. Not a living, but it's something. And, I don't know. Would we be making that much in record sales royalties if there wasn't streaming around? You can't really understand. You can't really say if streaming wasn't around. The world has changed. So I don't know. I don't know if it's really affected us a lot though. But I think that if you're still popular now enough for people to actually sell records or stream you in tens of millions, that you might be able to make some money off of it. But that's not very many people.
Wow. That's really informative and really insightful, genuinely. My next question actually kind of bounces off that. So in the last, 30, years or so, having a openly out, queer gay band, how have you seen that sort of cultural shift from your perspective, especially in like the music area, like the area of music, and kind of how I would say that bands like Pansy Division allowed for the needle of acceptability and people having exposure to, LGBT people and issues, being able to move that needle towards acceptance. Do you feel like Pansy Division's been a major part of that?
I think we are part of that. I mean, when back in the 90s, in the 90s, I used to carry around a piece of paper in my wallet that was a list of queer bands, and I'd hear about a new one and I'd add it to it. And after a certain point, there were just so many, I didn't keep a list anymore. And, now there are so many. I mean, part of the reason we're known for it is because we're really explicit about singing being gay as subject matter, whereas there are a lot of queer musicians who are open and out, but they aren't necessarily talking about queer issues or gay issues like we are. So I um, I feel like we blazed trails for people who now have never heard of us, but that's okay. We got to do it, and enough people still remember and know who we are that 30 years later we're still out playing shows and having fun doing the band. Difference now is that we all live in different places in the country and we don't really have the opportunity to get together and work on things like new music. We are just all too busy. And everybody's in other bands too, except me. I'm still threatening to make a solo album. I just don't know when I'll get around to it. Because I'm busy too. And the band keeps me busy enough. Um, but I'm also, I started this band. I was in my early 30s. I'm heading into my mid 60s now, so I'm going to be retired in a couple of years. So I might make a lot more music at being older. So we'll see.
That's awesome. Thank you. What's your favorite piece of Pansy Division merch that y'all have ever made? What are some of the greatest hits of Pansy Division merch?
We had some really nice shirts that I thought were cute, um, that I was proud of. merchandise. We had stickers and T-shirts, but when I think of, I mean, for me, the most important thing are the records. So, the album covers that we have some album covers that I just am really proud of, and uh, but yeah, there's some cute T-shirts. Sadly, a lot of our old T-shirts go for a lot of money now on eBay, and I thought, oh, well, maybe we should make some of those shirts again to sell because they're getting bootlegged on Etsy. If you go to Etsy and tell people that they are bootlegging you, they absolutely ignore you. So I thought, well, maybe we should go. The only legal Pansy Division shirt is the one on our website, unless someone's selling an old one. But it's like, wait a minute, if we did all these shirts, they've got to be stored somewhere, and it's like I don't have a wing of my house available just to store T-shirts. So I think we're just sticking with one for now.
Awesome. That's great. So going like back to the being really proud of the art and the liner notes. I know liner notes are a huge part of, Pansy Division album experience and the experience you get opening up, always lots of great safe sex tips, lots of really good resources. And like, that's something that I've always really noticed about y'all's records is liner notes are heavily used for their fullest extent. And kind of going back to that question, like with any newer material, has that presentation changed with more recent albums?
Yeah. So when we were putting out records in the 90s, it was the era of AIDS. There was no cure for it. There was no way to prevent it except using condoms. So our thought was we wanted to educate our fans, some of whom needed to be educated. Especially, we didn't think we were going to have a teenage audience when we started because we were 30. We thought, well, we're not aiming for kids, we're aiming for gay adults who will understand what we're talking about. And we got so many kids. It was really amazing, partly because of Green Day and Lookout. And we thought, well, there's so much anti-gay propaganda that you hear. And back then, there were still sodomy laws. So even though it almost never happened, technically, if they want to get you for something, you can be arrested for that. And so we thought we better put information out on our records, inside the records, so that people could know things that, especially if they weren't part of a gay community, if they were very isolated or they hadn't come out or weren't sure. Here was information that, somebody experimenting, might save their life or, at least keep them from being HIV positive. So we thought it was really important, especially alongside the fact that we were singing all these fun songs about sex, to also, talk about the downside of that and acknowledge that, yes, we have a pro-sex slant, but you also have to know about this other stuff. But after a certain point, we stopped doing it. I thought we had made our point. It's the 30th anniversary of Deflowered, our second album. We'll be playing more songs from that album than we have been at the shows coming up. But looking at the inside record sleeve of Deflowered, there was a big list of all of the LGBT groups that we found, support groups in the country. I knew activists who had lists like that, and I said, give me that. I want to put that on our album covers. So we listed them by state. We listed phone numbers because this was pre-internet, or at least the dawn of the internet. So that was part of the way you spread information before the internet. Word of mouth.
That's awesome. So with Deflowered turning 30, what memories stand out from its release and recording? What was fun about that record?
What was great about Deflowered was it was our second album. We had done Undressed the year before, and the response had been really good. And we went all over the country. We did a 3-week tour. Or I think we spent actually a month going to different parts of the country, different times, and had a really good reception. Not a huge amount of people yet, but there were people everywhere that we went that knew who we were and were looking forward to seeing us. That made us very confident about doing our second album, because the first album we didn't know if anybody would hear it or pay attention to it or buy it, or if it would just go unnoticed. But it got noticed, and I thought we were doing the right thing and that people would get into it. So I was very heartened by that. But knowing that you've got an audience for your next record made us approach it differently. Like, wow, we've got people listening to us now, and some of them are kids. So there are a few songs on the album, unlike the first album, that are directed at teenagers. 2 in particular, Deep Water, which is me trying to put myself in the mind space of high school and remember what that was like and sing about that. And then Denny, which is a song about someone who is HIV positive. A friend of mine in San Francisco at the time had written a poem. He'd given me his poetry chapbook. And when I read the poem, I thought, oh, this is expressing something I want to express. So I took his poem and cut and pasted it and reorganized it and cut some things out and added some things. So it's about half the original and half what I contributed, so that we could have a song that spoke honestly about someone who is HIV positive on the same album that has, Groovy Underwear on it. So we wanted to, make sure that we weren't trying to duck the issue. But that record came out, and it came out at the beginning of the summer in '94, and we thought, well, we were both going to work for a few more months and then quit and try to do the band full time. And instead, Green Day came along and said, oh, will you please open for us starting next month? And we're like, yes, we don't have a drummer, but yes, we'll find one. And so we actually ended up playing with Green Day over the first show and last show was over a 10-month period. And during that time, we had 4 different drummers. Pre-Luis, looking for the right person.
That's awesome. So speaking of like Lookout Records and kind of how that ended up, what was the transition from Lookout over to Alternative Tentacles like?
The record that came out on Alternative Tentacles was offered to Lookout, and they declined it, which was a big bummer for us. We had thought about getting off of Lookout before Absurd Pop Song Romance, and had talked to a couple labels, but we were very picky. We thought, well, we're not going to leave unless we get this label or that label. But I felt like at a certain point, the people running Lookout had less interest in us than they had at the beginning, and we felt a little overlooked, even though we were touring our asses off for these records. So when we realized Lookout didn't want to do the record, we looked into who else might be interested, and Jello Biafra of Alternative Tentacles, he had been into our band and wanted to sign us before we signed in the first place with Lookout. At the time, it seemed like it was either one would have been fine. Lookout acted sooner, and that's partly why we did it. As it turns out, being on Lookout was absolutely pivotal to the Green Day connection and so much that happened after. So being on a different label, I'm not sure how much different things would have been, but I think we wouldn't have been as well known. But you know, Jello was happy to take us on after he said, you know, you're on the label a decade too late. Should have been on my label in the first place. But you know, he's wanted us on his label all along, and we've now been on the label for 20 years, more than 20 years.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Were albums like It's Only Right and Natural by the Frogs or Beer, Steers, and Queers by Revolting Cocks anywhere in kind of your worldview, kind of going into the beginning of Pansy Division?
It's funny you mentioned the Frogs because I really do hate them. And when that album came out, It's Only Right and Natural, it came out, I think, in 91, perhaps 92. Um, it was like, to me, I listened to it and I thought, oh, it's straight people pretending to be gay. Okay, well, whatever. But then I listened to it and it's like, it was just making a joke out of being gay. And I thought, well, it really made me angry. It's partly because I thought there just aren't gay people out in rock. So of course we can do this. Who's ever going to call us on it? Well, we did. I thought that, you know, listen to our music. We have a sense of humor, but you know, we weren't making fun of something. And that's what that album was to me. Um, but I thought, well, straight people realize it's time for a gay band. It's time that a gay band did the same thing. So when we came along, I thought, you know, we'll be the real thing. We won't be the fake gay band, the faux gay band.
That's
But
a great answer.
but you know, I was always looking for um, other queer bands to come along. And, you know, to be fair, I feel like we were the first to break through, but there were others about the same time. A band from Canada, Fifth Column, were really the first gay rock band I knew of, but they barely existed at the time that they were putting records out. Like, I, you know, never saw a show. We did play with them once after I think in 1994 in Canada, where they were from. But then there was Glenn Meadmore, who was from Los Angeles. He still plays once in a while. He was doing a country punk thing that actually was really good, and I you know I like both those bands. And then there were other people kind of coming out at the woodwork at the same time as us, namely Tribe Eight, who were a dyke band from San Francisco. I mean, at least they were at the time because a number of them have transitioned now. So now it might be a trans dyke band. But you listen to their records from the '90s, and it was it was like this: the Stooges are Black Flag if they were dykes. So they were a great band coming up in San Francisco at the same time as us. Um, so we really started at the same time. Um, but you know, before that, what you had was gay people out in dance music, which is not something I've really ever been into. Respect those people, but you know, it seemed like being gay in rock was the final frontier. Well, no, the next to last frontier. Being gay in hip hop was the final frontier, or country maybe. So, but we wanted to. But I grew up with rock and roll and wanted to uh, apply my viewpoint to that kind of music.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that and really appreciate that answer. What advice would you give to young queer musicians?
I have no idea. It is so different now than the landscape that when we started. Um, you know, I would say do it. It's easier to be out and and be seen than ever. It's also harder than ever to get attention. If you can be that group or that act that, you know, fits through the eye of the needle and gets through to people, that's great. But you know, I mean, we did our band hoping it would take off, but even if it didn't, we were going to do it anyway, at least for a while. So I would, you know, encourage people to to do it.
That's awesome. That's a really good answer. And I think that's good advice for anyone that's into music or anyone working on any sort of creative project. Let's see. Yeah. I think I've only got like one or two left for you, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I hope I'm not taking up too much of your time this evening. I'm having a blast talking to you.
No, I can handle a couple more.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. So I've always thought that puns are a huge part of Pansy Division in its music and songwriting.
Mhm.
Have there ever been any puns you couldn't use or haven't used? Are there any puns you regret not making?
There are plenty of puns I haven't used because I do know there's a limit. And there's a few that I've used that I kind of like would kind of like to retract years later. Not going to say where. Um, but I have to be wary that even though I love puns, not everybody does. So I don't want to be too punny. It's nice to be clever. Clever and punny doesn't always align.
Mhm.
But yes, I wanted to include humor in Pansy Division because I wanted to have fun on stage. Even though I'm serious about what I'm doing, I wanted to have an enjoyable time when I'm performing. So if I get up there and some of our songs are not humorous, they are of serious content and tone, and we do some of them, but it's more I wanted the live show to be more a celebratory, joyous thing. So, that was our approach from the beginning. That was how I thought I was going to make a band with this content go over, hopefully.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I hear there's a thousandth show coming up for the band. Anything special planned for it?
We have if the year unfolds as scheduled, we'll have 999 shows at the end of this year. And so we're from San Francisco. We're going to go back to San Francisco in the spring and play of next year and play our 1000th show. Um, Sadly, none of us live there anymore. San Francisco is a tough place to live. Um, it was easier when rents were low. There's a lot of good advantages about living there, but it can also take its toll on you over the years, especially climbing stairs, having to have roommates, when you're older. Um, so um, I thought, well, if I'm going to retire eventually, it's not going to be here. So that was really the reason that I left. But I want to make sure that we have it won't be our final show, but our 1000th show in a place, in that place. But after that, we're going to go on a European tour next year. We haven't done a full European tour since the end of the 90s. And so we're not stopping, but we're going to, um, plant a flagpole and say, here's our 1000th show. And we'll play a long show and do a lot of songs that we normally don't do. We're still discussing what we're going to do for the show, but it's my idea that we don't have an opening act, that we open for ourselves, and it'll just be a night of Pansy Division. So that will be in April, I think, of 19. We've got to get the date set, but I think we've picked a date now. Now we have to. I'm not going to announce it till we actually confirm it.
Awesome. That's so cool. Thank you for sharing that. So looking back at your career and with Pansy Division, is there anything you wish you could have done differently?
I remember when we were in the 90s trying to make a living off the band, back when my rent was cheap. I remember thinking, if we could make in the 90s $500 a night, our band could sustain itself. In the end, it seemed to average about 300 a night, and that just wasn't enough. I was There was a podcast that reached out to us recently. They reached out to our publicist, and they said, "Hey, your website doesn't list a manager or what?" I'm sorry. He found our booking agent. Our booking agent's listed on our website, but he emails the booking agent saying, "Hey, I don't see a manager listed. I don't see a publicist listed." And I'm like, "Well, our publicist is part time, and we've managed our band the whole time, partly because when, even at our peak, we are never quite popular enough for it so that we couldn't handle it ourselves. So I think my only regret is that we didn't get more popular than we did. I remember looking up to bands like Superchunk and Guided by Voices, and I thought that is the level I want to be at, where we're not big and have to answer to a lot of people, but to be able to just do what we want and have enough people come see us that we can make a living off of it. We did make our living off of it for 5 years, but it was tough. And since then, we've had other jobs. So I think, but it went so well. It went so much better than we expected when we thought that it seems kind of selfish to make that kind of complaint. Everybody wants to be more popular, sell more records, have a career in music. And it's hard to do. Well, you can do it for a while. It's hard to sustain. And, but uh, that was also when I was paying my own health insurance. And it only cost $170 a month. So those were different times. And that, would have been impossible later. So, and I think about that when I think about British bands. I'm like, okay, British bands have National Health Service. They don't have to worry about losing their insurance if they go out and tour for 3 months. Whereas that's an American problem that, people have tried to fix, and it's gotten better, but it's still not anywhere near what it should be like, in my opinion. But there's a majority of the country that disagrees and votes against it, and there you go.
Yep. Unfortunate. Very unfortunate. What's your favorite Guided by Voices record, if you don't mind me asking?
Not a huge Guided by Voices fan. I like them now and then. He irritates me the way he just spews out songs. It's like they're consistent, but every once in a while there's a great one, and I think, why don't you just make an album of great stuff instead of stuff that's pretty decent? But I think Guided by Voices fans would probably want to punch me for saying that. But I think Do the Collapse, which is the first one they did that was not lo-fi. They don't really sound lo-fi anymore, but that to me was the record that is held up the most. And I gotta say, I didn't even like it at the time. I heard it in retrospect. The guy's an interesting writer, but I get no feeling from those songs. I get no emotion. It seems like an exercise, but it's a good exercise. This song's snappy, sounds good. These are weird lyrics. What do they mean? Is there any depth? I don't know. So I've got I still buy CDs and records. I've got 8 of theirs, but I feel like that's enough. I still listen. Every once in a while they put out something that's really, I think, is really good. And other times it's just like, yeah, that's decent. A lot of decent stuff.
I feel the same way about Stereolab, so can very much relate.
I prefer Stereolab over Guided by Voices, but they're, after a certain point, I used to have all the Stereolab records, and then at a certain point I'm like, nah, don't need these. But I still have a lot.
That's awesome. Are there any recent modern bands that you've been really enjoying or digging?
I spend a lot of time listening to music still, and I'm very actively trying to dig things up and hear about new bands. So in fact, I should just look at my Spotify playlist because my phone is right here.
Oh my gosh.
So what I try to do is, I have a friend who used to live in San Francisco who lives in Europe now. And about every 6 weeks we get together and listen to a playlist that I've compiled of new stuff, because we have very similar tastes and used to go to a lot of concerts together. Another gay rebel, not into dance music. So so I collect stuff generally. He'll send me stuff too, and we'll listen to it, and that way we keep up. During the aughts, I worked in a great record store in San Francisco, so I was able to keep up pretty well that way. But after I quit that in 2009, I had to find a way to keep up because working in a record store is a great way to at least know about things, even if you don't get to hear anything. But but I think my favorite current band is a band from Australia called RVG, which stands for the Romy Verga Group. Romy Verga is a trans singer and songwriter, guitarist who has a great rock band from Melbourne. They put out 3 albums, and the third just came out last year. It's called Brainworms. That was my favorite record last year. And my favorite record the year before was by Ezra Furman, who is a genderqueer performer from Chicago, who I've seen perform a number of times, who I worry about their mental health. That's what a lot of the songs are about. But, questioning about transitioning, what do I want to do? But I find it really to be compelling stuff. I like a band from Finland that almost no one has heard of called Teksti TV 666. TEKSTI TV 666. They're basically their intent is to combine the Ramones with krautrock. So they have 4 guitar players, drummer, and bassist. And they have this wall of guitar sound, which is melodic and sometimes drony and is very steady in the way that krautrock is. So I've spent a lot of time listening to them in the last 5 years. And I love this band from Detroit called Proto-Martyr, who are a post-punk band, kind of like an American version of The Fall. I'm a big Fall fan over the years. And I've only seen Proto-Martyr once, partly because they kept playing sold out shows and then the pandemic interfered. But there's a band from England called the Tubs, a sort of indie rock band with a bad attitude and a singer who sounds like Richard Thompson, of all people. It's very strange. And then I love this band in the 2010s called Royal Headache from Australia. And they have the singer, and they broke up, and I was sad about that. Their singer has a new band called Finnegan's Wake. It's spelled weird, Finnegan's Wake. That's some of the stuff that I'm listening to now. And a British band called Young Fathers, who are like, they're rock and electronica and hip hop and kind of uncategorizable. But I've been listening to them for about a decade now, and their last record was really good. So there's a few things.
That's awesome. Thank you for all those amazing recommendations on stuff you've been listening to and enjoying. That's invaluable.
I'm glad I have my phone right here.
Me too. Well, that's awesome. I'm very much looking forward to the show on April 4th, and very much excited to be opening up for y'all. And same thing with Smart Patrol, who's also opening up. That's a great, also local queer band. They rule. It's going to be a really great show, and I'm really excited to have Pansy Division in Birmingham.
I'm proud to have 2 queer bands opening for us in Birmingham because there's progress. That's tangible progress. So awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you talking with me today. Stay tuned to Substrate Radio. We're going to have a lot of really great stuff coming up. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Francine.
Awesome. Thank you.